Commander Nathan Drake's spacecraft was a crumpled mass of metal, now nothing more than a wrecked shell on the surface of the desert planet Korath. The engine failure had been sudden, and despite his best efforts to regain control, Nathan found himself crashing through the dry red sky. The ship's systems had gone offline, and the emergency beacon had long since ceased transmitting. Nathan wiped the sweat from his brow and surveyed the barren landscape. His water supply was running low, and with no way to contact the Federation, he was stranded. The sun beat down relentlessly, casting harsh shadows over the endless sand dunes. His heart sank. He knew the risks of this mission, exploration of uncharted planets, but nothing had prepared him for this. Korath was a hostile world, known for its scorching heat and dangerous wildlife. Worse yet, the planet had a reputation for scarce resources, especially water, the most precious commodity of all. With no choice but to find shelter, Nathan grabbed his survival kit and set out on foot. His only hope was to find a nearby oasis or spring. Hours passed, and the endless stretch of dry land showed no signs of life. His boots left deep impressions in the sand, and each step felt heavier than the last. The sun was now low on the horizon, but the air was still hot, and Nathan's throat burned with thirst. Then he saw something. A shadow in the distance. It was barely a blur at first, but as Nathan moved closer, he could make out the form of a figure lying motionless near what seemed to be a dried-up oasis. He quickened his pace, heart pounding. When he reached the figure, he stopped. A woman, though not human, was sprawled across the sand. Her skin was a pale, silvery gray, and her hair was a dark blue that shimmered faintly in the fading light. She had a pair of long, thin limbs, and her body looked delicate, fragile even. She was breathing shallowly, her chest rising and falling in weak gasps. Nathan knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. She was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering as she tried to focus on him. "Water," she whispered in a soft voice, her words barely audible. "I need water." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. She was an alien, possibly from a distant system. Her species was unfamiliar to him, but he could see the desperation in her eyes. He quickly checked his supplies. His water bottle was nearly empty, and he knew it wouldn't be enough for both of them. He hesitated for a moment, then made a quick decision. He couldn't leave her here. His instincts as a soldier and a human being told him to help her. Taking out the last of his water, Nathan gently lifted her head, offering her the bottle. The alien woman drank greedily, her hands shaking as she clung to the bottle. The water worked quickly, and soon her breathing steadied. Her eyes opened fully, locking onto Nathan's with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You," she said, her voice stronger now. "You saved me." Nathan smiled, though it was a weary smile. "It's nothing. You looked like you needed it more than I did." The alien woman took a deep breath, finally able to sit up. She glanced at the now empty water bottle in Nathan's hand, and then back at him. "My name is Tyra," she said. "I am from the Thalaxian people. My mission. I failed." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Failed? What mission?" Tyra looked away, her gaze distant as if lost in thought. "I came here to find a cure. A sacred drop of water that could save my world." She paused, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But the oasis, it is gone. Poisoned." Nathan frowned, feeling the weight of her words. He could see the pain in her eyes, the hopelessness. For a moment, they both sat in silence, listening to the wind blowing softly across the dunes. It was clear that they both needed something more than just water. They needed a way to survive. Zyra turned her gaze back to Nathan, her expression serious now. You must help me," she said. "There is no time. I cannot do this alone." Nathan looked at her, his mind racing. The situation was dire, but something told him that Zyra wasn't just another stranded alien. She was different, and together, they might stand a chance. With a deep breath, Nathan nodded. All right, let's figure this out. We'll find what you need. And so, their unlikely alliance was formed. Two strangers, one human, one alien, bound together by the most basic of needs, survival. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows over the desert landscape. Nathan and Xira had settled near the edge of the dried oasis, the last remnants of water still visible in the cracked ground. The air was cooler now, but the danger of dehydration still hung heavily in the atmosphere. Xira sat cross-legged on the ground, staring at the empty water bottle Nathan had given her. Her fragile, silvery skin looked even paler in the dimming light. Her sharp, alien eyes glinted with a mix of gratitude and fear. Nathan crouched beside her, his own thirst beginning to feel unbearable. The little water he had left wasn't enough for the both of them, and he knew they had to find more, or they wouldn't survive the night. "You mentioned a sacred drop," Nathan said, breaking the silence. "What is that, and why is it so important to you?" Xira hesitated, her eyes drifting to the horizon. "The sacred drop is the last pure water. It is said to be the key to healing our world. Our entire planet is dying, poisoned by a great enemy. My people, the Phylaxians, we were once a flourishing civilization, but without water, we have lost everything." Nathan listened carefully. The desert planet Korath was known to have ancient ruins and forgotten histories, but this sounded far beyond what he had expected. A cure for an entire planet. This was no ordinary search. "I came to find it." Xira continued, her voice quieter now, tinged with sadness. "The sacred drop is rumored to be hidden in the Temple of Tasher. It is said to be the last source of water on Korath, untouched by the poison. But," she paused, looking down at her hands, "I couldn't find it. The temple was destroyed long ago, and the path is lost." Nathan felt a tug at his heart. He understood what it meant to fight for survival. But this was different. Xira wasn't just searching for a way to stay alive. She was searching for the survival of her people. "We can still find it," Nathan said, his voice firm. "If it's out there, we'll find it together. I didn't come this far just to give up." Xira looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and gratitude. It was clear that she hadn't expected someone to show so much faith in her cause. "But how? The path is lost. The desert is full of traps, and the temple's defenses are legendary." Nathan stood, dusting off his pants. His military training had taught him many things, including how to overcome impossible odds. "I've faced dangerous situations before. If we can get close to the temple, we might be able to figure out how to bypass whatever is left. We just need to be careful." Xira nodded slowly. You would risk your life for a world that is not your own." Nathan met her gaze, unwavering. "I'd risk it for anyone who needs help. And right now, your people need help more than anyone. You're not alone in this." A quiet moment passed between them. Despite the vast differences in their species, there was a sense of shared understanding, a bond forged in the heat of survival. Xira stood up, her legs shaky from the strain of her injuries, but she didn't falter. "Then we must leave at once. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to find the temple. It's hidden deep in the desert, and the sandstorms will only get worse." Nathan nodded, already gathering his gear. "We'll head out first thing in the morning. But tonight, we need to rest. You're still weak, and we both need to recharge. I'll take the first watch." Xira agreed, though her eyes were full of concern. What if the enemy finds us? What if we're too late? Nathan looked at her with a reassuring smile, though he could feel the weight of her worry. "We're not too late yet. We'll make it. Trust me." That night, they sat side by side near the fading embers of a small fire. The stars above them were clear and bright, a comforting reminder of the vast universe that stretched out around them. But the vastness of the desert still felt oppressive, and the journey ahead seemed almost impossible. Yet, in that moment, Nathan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time. He wasn't just a soldier on a mission anymore. He was part of something greater, a struggle for survival, for hope, for a future. As the desert winds began to howl once more, they prepared for the challenges ahead. Their shared need for survival and a common goal brought them closer together. Whatever lay in wait, they would face it side by side. The first light of dawn broke across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The desert, with its endless stretch of golden sand, seemed to stretch on forever. Nathan adjusted the straps of his backpack, his mind already focused on the journey ahead. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Finding the Temple of Tashir and its sacred drop wasn't just important for Xyra. It was their only chance for survival. Xyra stood nearby, looking out at the vast desert. Her fragile form looked even smaller against the expansive backdrop of sand and sky. Despite her weakened state, she appeared determined, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The kindness Nathan had shown her had given her a new sense of hope. "Ready?" Nathan asked, tightening his boots and securing his equipment. Xyra nodded. "Yes, we must move quickly. The temple is far, and we have little time." Together, they set off, walking side by side. The morning air was still cool, but Nathan knew the temperature would rise quickly as the sun climbed higher. The desert was cruel and unforgiving, a place where the heat could drain you of everything: water, strength, hope. For hours they trekked through the sand. Nathan kept a steady pace, watching Xyra closely to make sure she wasn't pushing herself too hard. She was strong, but her fragile alien body had limits. Her psychic abilities, those strange, mysterious powers she had spoken of, hadn't seemed to help much in this desert wasteland. The dry air seemed to sap all energy from her, leaving her breathless. "I can feel it," Xyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The temple is close. I can sense its energy, but it's hidden. The desert has covered it over time." Nathan glanced at her, impressed by her abilities. She was more than just a survivor. She was a part of this land in ways he couldn't fully understand. "How do we find it?" he asked. Xyra stopped walking, closing her eyes for a moment. "The energy, it's connected to the earth. The sand hides it, but I can feel the vibrations beneath us. If we are close, I will guide you." Nathan nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. They were getting closer, but the dangers of the desert were still very real. The terrain was treacherous, and the temperature was climbing steadily. Nathan kept a careful eye out for signs of trouble, whether it be a hidden predator or the first signs of a deadly sandstorm. As they continued, the wind began to pick up. At first, it was just a gentle breeze, but soon it grew stronger. The sand began to swirl around them, blurring the horizon and making it harder to see. Nathan's instincts kicked in. "We need shelter," he shouted, grabbing Xyra's arm and pulling her toward a nearby rock formation. The wind howled as they took cover beneath the rocks. Nathan pulled his scarf over his mouth to shield against the flying sand, while Xyra wrapped herself in her cloak. They huddled together, waiting for the worst of the storm to pass. The sandstorm raged for what felt like hours. Nathan could feel the ground vibrating beneath him, the force of the wind pushing against the rocks. Every few minutes, he'd peek out from their shelter to assess the situation. But the storm showed no sign of letting up. "We can't stay here forever," Nathan said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. "We need to move." Xyra nodded, but her face was pale. The storm was draining her, her psychic powers barely able to fight against the storm's intensity. "The temple's energy is strong, but it is hidden deep. We must keep going." Nathan hesitated for a moment, knowing that continuing through the storm was risky. But he also knew that waiting in the storm would be just as dangerous. They had to push forward. "We'll make it," he said, more to reassure himself than Xyra. As the storm began to die down, they stood up and continued their journey, the sand still swirling around them. Hours passed, and the temperature continued to rise, but Syra's strength seemed to grow with each step. She no longer appeared as fragile as before, her psychic focus sharpening with every passing moment. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Syra stopped again. Her eyes glowed faintly, a sign that she was tapping into her psychic abilities. "It's here," she said, her voice full of certainty. "The temple is just beyond this ridge." Nathan's heart raced as he looked at the ridge ahead. It was hard to see through the haze of dust in the air, but he could feel the change. Something was different. The energy in the air was palpable, thick and heavy, as if the very ground beneath their feet was alive. With renewed determination, they climbed the ridge, ready to face whatever lay beyond. As they crested the top, they saw it, a massive ancient structure hidden beneath layers of sand, partially buried, but still standing tall against the desert winds. "The Temple of Tashur," Syra whispered, awed in her voice. Nathan took a deep breath. They had found it. But their journey was far from over. The temple, with all its secrets, would not be easily accessed, and even if they could reach the sacred drop, they would have to face what was guarding it. As Nathan and Syra stood atop the ridge, the ancient Temple of Tashur slowly emerged from the sands below. The structure was grand, though much of it had been swallowed by the desert over the centuries. Towering stone pillars, eroded and cracked by time, jutted out from the sand like the remnants of a forgotten civilization. The temple's entrance was barely visible, a narrow archway half hidden beneath a thick layer of sand. Syra's eyes sparkled with hope and excitement, but there was also a trace of fear. "This is it," she whispered, taking a cautious step forward. "The sacred spring is inside, but the temple is old and dangerous." Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of their mission. They had come so far, and now, at the brink of success, the real challenges were about to begin. The wind was still strong, but the temperature had dropped slightly as the sun began to sink below the horizon. With steady steps, they made their way down the slope toward the temple. The ground was uneven, and the shifting sand made every step feel uncertain. Nathan kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, ready for anything. The desert had proven to be unpredictable, and he didn't expect the temple to be any different. As they neared the entrance, they were met with an eerie silence. The air felt thick, as though something ancient and powerful lay just beneath the surface. Syra stopped in her tracks, her eyes closed, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's a barrier," she said softly. "A defense mechanism. It's meant to keep intruders away." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of defense?" Syra hesitated, her face tense with concentration. "I can feel it, but it's complicated. I'll need to focus to break through it, but it will take time. You'll have to protect me." Nathan looked into the dark entrance, then back at Syra. He didn't hesitate. "I'll keep watch. You do what you need to." Syra nodded, her eyes closing again. Nathan stood guard, scanning the surroundings. The wind still howled across the desert, but there was something different about the air here, something that felt alive. It was as if the temple itself was waiting for them. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Nathan felt the tension grow as he kept his gaze fixed on the shadows around them. Every rustle of the wind made him jump. Every shift in the sand felt like a threat. He knew the temple was hiding something, something powerful and dangerous. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Syra opened her eyes. "It's done," she said, her voice filled with relief. "The barrier is gone. We can enter." Nathan gave her a nod of approval. "Good work." The entrance loomed before them, dark and foreboding. They stepped inside, the cool air hitting them as they passed through the threshold. The interior of the temple was dim, lit only by the faint glow of crystals embedded in the walls. The stones felt smooth beneath their feet, worn down by centuries of time. Ancient carvings covered every surface, depicting scenes of rituals, gods, and beings from another time. Syra walked ahead, her eyes scanning the walls as she moved. She seemed to be searching for something, perhaps a sign that would guide them to the sacred spring. Nathan followed closely behind, his senses alert. The temple was vast, and they had no idea how deep it went. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the silence was overwhelming. It was as if the temple itself was watching, waiting. Nathan's instincts told him to be careful. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, Zyra stopped in her tracks. She raised a hand, signaling Nathan to stay quiet. The air had shifted again, growing colder, heavier. And then they heard it. A low, humming sound, like a distant chant, echoing through the corridors. Zyra turned to Nathan, her expression serious. "This is it. The sacred spring is close, but we're not alone." Nathan's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "What do you mean?" "I sense something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something ancient. It's guarding the spring." Nathan's mind raced. A guardian. A trap. Whatever it was, he knew they had to be ready. They were so close to finding the drop, but danger could be waiting at every corner. With renewed determination, they moved forward, cautiously, every step echoing in the silence of the ancient temple. The hum grew louder, and the air seemed to thicken with each passing moment. They rounded a corner, and then, there it was. In the center of the vast chamber was a large pool, its surface glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. At the center of the pool, suspended in the air, was a crystal vial, shimmering with a pure, brilliant drop of water. It was beautiful, and it was the answer to everything. But as they moved closer, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The guardian was near, and they weren't alone anymore. The chamber was vast, stretching far beyond what the eye could see. In the center of the room, the glowing pool shimmered with an ethereal light, casting strange reflections on the stone walls. The vial containing the sacred drop of water hovered above the pool, glowing like a beacon of hope. Nathan and Zyra could feel the weight of the moment. Their journey had led them here, to the heart of the temple. But they weren't alone. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor beneath their feet. The air around them felt heavier, charged with energy. It was as if the temple itself was alive, its ancient power awakening. Zyra stepped forward, her eyes locked on the vial. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "This is the sacred drop. It will save my people, if we can get to it." Nathan watched her, his eyes scanning the room. There was something unsettling about the way the light flickered, the way the shadows danced on the walls. He could feel it, a presence, something watching them. Suddenly, the ground trembled again. The walls seemed to shift, and a low growl echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the stone. Nathan's instincts kicked in. He spun around, his hand on his weapon, ready for whatever was coming. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, and its body was covered in dark, jagged armor that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Its face was hidden behind a mask, but its eyes, bright, piercing, and full of ancient wisdom, glowed with a fierce intensity. The guardian of the temple. Zyra stepped back, her face tense. "The guardian," she whispered. "It's the protector of the sacred drop. We cannot take it unless we pass its test." Nathan's heart raced. A test? What kind of test? The guardian's voice, deep and resonant, filled the chamber. "To claim the sacred drop, you must prove your worth. Only those who are worthy may restore the balance. Fail, and the consequences will be dire." Zyra's eyes locked onto the guardian. "We will pass. I must save my people." The guardian tilted its head, as if considering her words. "Your determination is strong, but it is not enough. You must show that you understand the true cost of this gift. The test will begin now." Before Nathan could react, the ground beneath their feet shifted again. A series of stone platforms rose from the floor, each one hovering in midair. suspended by an invisible force. The chamber had transformed into a maze of floating platforms, each one connected by narrow bridges. At the far side of the room, a sacred drop hung in midair, just beyond reach. The guardian's voice echoed again. You must cross the platforms to reach the sacred drop. But beware, the path is treacherous. The test will challenge your resolve. Only the pure of heart can succeed. Nathan clenched his fists. He had no choice but to move forward. He glanced at Syra, who stood still, her face a mixture of fear and determination. We can do this, he said, his voice firm. Syra nodded. We will. They stepped onto the first platform, and the moment their feet touched the stone, the ground beneath them trembled again. A series of shadows flickered around them, rising from the floor. The shadows seemed to take on shapes, figures of creatures, twisted and dangerous. They moved with unnatural speed, circling the platforms, waiting for an opening. Nathan's heart pounded. He could feel the presence of the creatures, but he couldn't see them clearly in the shifting shadows. Stay close, he muttered, keeping his weapon ready. The first shadow lunged, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. Nathan reacted quickly, firing a shot. The creature dissipated into mist, its form vanishing as it was struck by the blast. But more shadows appeared, this time from all directions. Keep moving, Nathan shouted to Syra, who was standing frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with fear. Syra quickly gathered herself and nodded. She began to move across the platforms with careful steps, her psychic abilities reaching out to sense any danger. As she moved, the shadows seemed to hesitate, retreating from her energy. But the path wasn't easy. With every step, the platform beneath them would tremble, as if the entire structure was coming apart. The farther they moved, the harder it became to maintain balance. As they reached the final platform, only one challenge remained. The sacred drop hovered just beyond them, but the last stretch of the path was narrow, with a deep chasm below. One misstep, and they would fall into the abyss. Syra reached out, her hands trembling as she approached the drop, but Nathan's voice stopped her. Syra, wait, he said, his eyes scanning the air above them. Something isn't right. Just then, the guardian's voice echoed once more. You have reached the final trial. To claim the sacred drop, you must choose. Only one may take the gift. The other must remain behind. Syra turned to Nathan, her face filled with confusion and fear. What does that mean? Nathan's heart sank. He understood now. The test wasn't just about strength. It was about sacrifice. Only one could save their people. The other would have to let go. The weight of the decision hung heavy between them. It was a test not only of their physical ability, but of their hearts. The final trial loomed before Nathan and Syra, heavy with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. The sacred drop shimmered just beyond their reach, its radiant glow filling the chamber with a soft light. The platform beneath them was narrow, and the abyss below seemed endless. But it wasn't the danger of falling that occupied their minds. It was the guardian's cryptic words. Only one could claim the drop. The other would be left behind. Syra stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the sacred vial. Her hands trembled slightly, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She could feel Nathan's gaze on her, but her mind was clouded with uncertainty. How could she make this choice? How could she ask Nathan to stay behind? How could she bear leaving him behind? Nathan, what do we do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan turned to her, his face unreadable for a moment. He could see the pain in her eyes, the same confusion he felt in his heart. But he knew one thing for sure, this wasn't just about them. It was about saving her people. It was about survival, and making sure that what they had come to find did not go to waste. I don't know, Nathan said softly, but we can't waste time. We have to make a choice. The guardian's presence seemed to grow stronger in the air, its voice echoing once again. The choice is yours. Only one can bear the burden. Choose wisely, for the fate of many rests on this moment. Nathan stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the sacred drop. "Zyra," he said gently, his voice calm but firm. "We've come this far together. We both knew the risk when we set out. This is your people's only hope. You have to be the one to take the drop. I'll stay behind." Zyra's eyes widened in shock. "No, I can't ask you to do that. We both came here for the same reason, to save my people. If you stay behind, I don't know how I can. I don't know if I can face them alone." Nathan stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to face them alone. You have the strength to do this. I know it. This is about your people, about survival. I can't take the drop, but you can. You have to." Zyra's heart ached with every word he spoke. She knew he was right. They had always known the risks, but this was different. This was not just a test of their abilities or courage. It was a test of their hearts. It was about making the hard choices when the stakes were the highest. "I can't do it without you," she whispered, her voice cracking. Nathan gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to. You're stronger than you think. You've always been strong." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the temple filled the air, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Time seemed to slow as Zyra looked at the drop, then back at Nathan. She saw the determination in his eyes, but also something softer, a quiet resolve. She knew he was doing this for her, and for her people. "I'll take it," Zyra finally said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she still felt in her heart. "I'll take it for all of us." Nathan nodded. "Then we're done. The decision's made." Zyra stepped forward, moving with purpose, her fingers reaching for the sacred drop. The moment her fingers brushed the vial, the air in the chamber seemed to shift. The light from the drop grew brighter, and the platform beneath them trembled. The guardian's voice echoed one final time. "May the sacred waters bring balance," the guardian intoned. "You have proven your worth." The vial glowed brightly, pulsing with energy. Zyra felt it deep in her bones, the power of the sacred drop filling her with warmth, and then an overwhelming sensation of peace. It was as if the very essence of life was flowing into her, the power to heal, to save, to protect. But just as quickly as the feeling came, it was gone. Zyra stood still, the vial now securely in her hand. Nathan looked at her, a mixture of relief and pride in his eyes. He had given her the strength to make the choice, but in the end, she had done it on her own. The guardian stepped back into the shadows, its form dissipating into the ether. The trial was over. The drop was theirs. Zyra held the vial carefully, her heart still racing. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for Nathan, for his support, for his sacrifice. But she also knew that the hardest part of the journey was still to come. She had the sacred drop, but there were still unknown dangers ahead. Nathan turned to her, his voice soft, but filled with hope. "You did it." Zyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," she corrected, her voice firm. Nathan smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on his shoulders seemed a little lighter. The road ahead would still be difficult, but they had succeeded in the first step. Together, they would face whatever came next. With the sacred drop safely in her hands, Zyra felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The glow of the vial had dimmed, but its power still hummed through her fingers, a constant reminder of what they had accomplished. They had done it. They had passed the Guardian's test. And now, she held the key to saving her people. But even as relief settled in, a new sense of urgency began to rise within her. The journey was far from over. They had the drop, yes, but the path home was long, and danger still lurked in the shadows. The desert outside the temple was vast, and the threats that had chased them earlier were not gone. They had to leave before anything else found them. "We need to go," Nathan said, his voice low and focused. He had been watching the entrance, alert as ever. "This place won't stay quiet for long." Zyra nodded, tucking the vial into the safety of her bag. "You're right. Let's get out of here." With one last glance at the chamber, the sacred pool now calm and still, they turned and began to make their way back through the temple. The passageways felt different now. The oppressive air from before had lifted, and it was as if the temple itself had accepted their presence. The path was clear, but that didn't mean they could let their guard down. They still had to make it back through the desert, back to the safety of civilization. As they reached the outer chambers, the once quiet hum of the temple faded into the background. The familiar sound of the wind outside picked up again, and the temperature seemed to drop further. They were heading into the evening, and the desert night was quickly approaching. Nathan paused as they neared the entrance, looking out into the vast stretch of sand. The desert was even more intimidating now, the dark silhouette of the dunes rising up against the dimming sky. The faint stars above didn't offer much comfort. This was a place that offered no mercy. "Do you think we'll make it?" Thyra asked, her voice quiet, almost to herself. She looked at the endless stretch of sand before them. Nathan turned to face her, offering a reassuring smile. "We've made it this far, haven't we? We can make it back." The words brought her some comfort, but a nagging sense of unease still lingered. There had been too many close calls, too many moments when she thought they might not survive. She wasn't sure how much more of the desert they could take. "We'll have to move fast," Nathan added, his tone serious. "There's no telling what might be out there now." Zyra nodded, adjusting the straps of her bag and tightening the cloth around her head to protect against the desert winds. They had learned the hard way how quickly the elements could change. Nightfall brought cold winds that could freeze them, but in the daylight, the sun's heat would scorch them. Together, they stepped out of the temple and into the desert night. The sand beneath their feet shifted as they moved, the grains sticking to their skin and clothes. The wind whipped through the empty expanse, carrying with it a biting cold. Thyra pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her breath visible in the chilly air. They traveled in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The path back to the oasis would be long, but they knew the way now. The desert no longer felt like an endless stretch of sand. It felt like a place they could conquer, just like they had conquered the temple. The sense of triumph they had felt in the chamber still burned bright within them. After a few hours, they stopped to rest. Nathan found a small rise in the sand where they could take cover from the wind, and they sat down for a moment to gather their strength. Zyra took a deep breath, looking up at the stars that seemed to shine brighter in the desert sky. "Do you ever wonder what else is out there?" she asked quietly. Nathan looked at her, surprised by the question. He hadn't given much thought to the world beyond what they had experienced together. But now, as he gazed up at the vastness of the sky, he felt something stirring inside him. A curiosity, a sense of wonder. "I don't know," he said slowly, "but I've learned that there's always something more. The desert, the temple, the drop. It's all part of something bigger, something we're only beginning to understand." Zyra smiled softly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe this is just the beginning." They sat in quiet contemplation for a moment, the wind still howling in the distance. But despite the uncertainty, there was a sense of peace between them, a quiet assurance that they would face whatever came next together. They rose to their feet after their brief rest, and Nathan led the way, with Zyra following closely behind. The journey home was still dangerous, but now they had something more than the sacred drop. They had each other, and that made all the difference. The night was cold, but they were ready. The road ahead might be uncertain, but they had proven to themselves that they could survive anything. Together, they would find their way back and bring hope to Xyra's people. The journey was far from over, but they would face it, side by side. The desert was quiet now. The only sounds were the soft crunch of sand beneath their boots and the whisper of the wind sweeping across the dunes. Nathan and Zyra walked side by side, the weight of the sacred drop still heavy in Zyra's bag. They had come so far, crossed so many hurdles, And yet the hardest part still lay ahead. The journey back to her people would be just as dangerous as the one they had faced in the temple. As the night sky stretched above them, the stars seemed to shine with a strange clarity. There was a quiet, peaceful beauty in the desert that Nathan had never expected to find. For the first time since they had entered the temple, he felt a sense of calm. But that calm was fleeting. As they moved forward, Nathan's mind remained sharp, ever watchful for any danger. They still didn't know what might be lurking out there, whether it was the creatures they had encountered in the temple or something new, something worse. But they couldn't let that stop them. They had come too far to turn back now. "Do you think we'll make it to the oasis by morning?" Zaira asked, her voice breaking the silence. Nathan glanced up at the dark sky. The stars were beginning to fade as the first hints of dawn began to creep in. "We should be close. If we keep moving at this pace, we'll get there soon enough." I nodded. But her eyes were distant. "I just hope we're not too late." Nathan understood the weight of her words. Her people were depending on her, and the pressure of that responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. He could see it in the way her shoulders slumped slightly, in the way her steps seemed a little slower than before. But despite everything, she was strong. She had proven that in the temple. She had made the hardest choice, and she had done it with determination and courage. "We're not too late," Nathan said, his voice firm. "We're going to get there, and when we do, you'll have everything you need to save your people." Zaira smiled faintly, grateful for his support. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Nathan. You've been with me through everything." "I'm not going anywhere," he replied, his tone steady. "We're in this together, all the way to the end." They continued walking in silence, the only sounds being the wind and the soft rustle of their footsteps in the sand. As the first rays of the sun began to rise over the horizon, the desert began to come alive. The golden light bathed the sand, turning the landscape into something almost magical. But there was no time to stop and admire the beauty of it all. They had a mission, and it had to be completed. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally saw it. The faint outline of the oasis in the distance. It was small, but it was a welcome sight. The water would be a lifeline for both of them. They quickened their pace, the excitement growing with each step. When they reached the edge of the oasis, Nathan could see the familiar shapes of the small settlement where Zaira's people lived. He had heard the stories of their resilience, of their ability to survive in such a harsh environment. But seeing it with his own eyes was something else entirely. The settlement seemed small, but it was full of life, the people moving about their daily tasks, despite the harsh conditions around them. Zaira walked ahead, her steps quickening as she neared the settlement. Nathan followed closely, feeling a sense of pride for her, for everything she had accomplished. When they reached the center of the settlement, Zaira turned to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Nathan smiled. "You don't need to thank me. You did this. You saved your people." She smiled back, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it together." Zaira's people gathered around them, their eyes full of curiosity and hope. The moment Sarah stepped forward, the air seemed to shift, and the weight of the sacred drop in her bag became even more significant. She raised the vial above her head, the light from the drop shining brightly. "The sacred drop," she announced, her voice steady and clear. "This will heal us, restore our land, and bring hope to our people." A cheer erupted from the crowd, their faces lighting up with hope. It was a sound that filled Nathan's heart with warmth. Zaira had done it. She had fulfilled her promise, and now her people would thrive again. But Zaira's eyes never left the vial. She knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but she was ready. She had made it this far. With Nathan by her side, and the sacred drop in her hand, she knew they could face anything that came their way. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the settlement, Zaira and Nathan stood together, looking ahead at the future. It was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And together, they would build a better tomorrow.